As you know, when we look around the nation with, certainly critical incidents involving police-involved shootings, it is so important to give the community, to give you information as to what transpired. So this is our commitment to transparency, not just for the sake of talking about it, but to reassure you where we are in the investigation. And this disclaimer I always make, as you know, we're very early in this officer-involved shooting incident that started last night at around 10:50. Well, actually, 2:30 this morning, the shooting took place. And so in less than 24 hours, we're here to update you where we are in the investigation. But in addition to that, we thought it would be appropriate to show you pieces of our video. And we'll show that toward the end. We also have a photograph of the weapon used, which we will provide all of you in the media. So first, let me just start by saying this. And I know I say it all the time, but I think it's so appropriate. I am fortunate as the leader of this great department to work with some of the most heroic officers in the country. And I mean heroic. What you will see is officers running towards gunfire, putting themselves in harm's way. And for that, I'm deeply thankful. And I hope all the viewers and listeners appreciate these men and women. I want to also applaud the work of the investigators, both those who were at the scene at the time of the initial encounter, doing their job to be faced with a critical incident. And then later on, certainly our investigators who responded out, as they all do, in the aftermath of a shooting incident. So I'm going to start, kind of give you a scenario. This is a very complex incident, and so I will certainly try to make it as simple as possible. But last night around 10:50, our officers were in the area of West McNichols and Ward Street. They were investigating a non-fatal shooting incident that involved 5 victims. The victims' ages were as follows: male black 36, white male 32, black male 18, black male 29, and a black female 30 years of old. In conjunction to that non-fatal shooting incident, there was a vehicle accident that resulted in a fatality. So we had officers investigating the non-fatal shooting incidents, as well as investigators there conducting what we call a fatal crash investigation. So at roughly 2:38 in the morning, as officers were continuing this investigation, streets were still blocked. It was a crime scene. A 27-year-old driving a 2019 Yukon drove up and fired one single shot at an officer. That round did strike the side of a police vehicle. As he was leaving the crime scene, he struck 2 parked police vehicles. He left at a high rate of speed. The officers initiated a pursuit, starting from that location through multiple areas of our city, traversing through the west side down Woodward, going through the downtown area, Campus Marshes, short time on a freeway, and then exited Gratiot. And what you will see, the speed that this vehicle was traveling. At times, we estimate the vehicle traveling at over 100 miles an hour. And certainly while it was 2:38, 2:45 in the morning, and there's not many out at that hour, certainly that poses an extreme danger to our community, to our officers. But clearly this was a suspect that we had to apprehend. Clearly he was focused on one thing and one thing only: to kill a police officer. And it didn't feel as if anybody else was involved, it just didn't matter. So as the pursuit continued through the city, a suspect, I think, caused some damage to his vehicle. He entered into a parking lot. As he came to a stop, he exits and he initiates a exchange of gunfire with police officers who were at the scene. That lasted a short time. At this point, we're not certain if he was struck by gunfire. He then began to run on foot He was pursued on foot and vehicle by our police officers. He must have went a short distance, maybe 30, I don't know, maybe a few yards, less than a half a mile, I would say. Less than a half a mile. And as soon as the first officer arrived adjacent to where this armed suspect was, he pointed the gun in the direction of the officer believing direct threat to his life and other officers. They began to exchange gunfire once again. The suspect hit the ground. They quickly transitioned from what, as you've oftentimes transitioned from a warrior mode to a life-saving mode. They began to administer first aid. He was then transported to a local hospital by our officers, where he then succumbed to his injuries. So we recovered a Smith & Wesson .40 caliber, which I will show you the picture of that weapon at the conclusion of my remarks. But I want to first say also, prayers go out to his family. Certainly anytime we have to use deadly force, certainly it's not something that police officers start their shift thinking about. But this 21, he lost a 21-year-old friend the day prior at a dice game. That was a multiple shooting incident. We've learned, we've talked with his mother. He was very distraught over the loss of his friend. We also found out that probably a month ago, a cousin, 6-month-old cousin, about a month ago, died. Not sure for what happened. And then, so we don't know if he was going through a state of depression at the time. Again, as it was indicated, there was a posting on Facebook clearly indicating, and I'll just make reference to it, "I'm hurt, man." That's all he said. And so this was in response to the loss of his good friend, a 21-year-old male. So in terms of his criminal history, very little in the way of criminal history. And so we were trying to figure out what would be the motive in an unprovoked way to attack Detroit police officers for no apparent reason. And so we're still working through that. As you know, and I've reported this out in the last several weeks, yes, we have seen an increase in violence directed at police officers, not just here in Detroit, but around this country. Some of you may ask, what's driving the violence? You know, personally, I think it's the anti-police rhetoric. I think here we're on the heels of a verdict in the trial. Certainly, you heard me talk extensively about the reckless comments by a U.S. Congresswoman. In fact, now two. Congresswoman Waters out of California, and then Tlaib here in Michigan. I firmly believe that those comments can fuel anger. And so I give you another example just of the unprovoked violence. Unfortunately, no officer was hurt. The officers were returning to their station after working the racing detail, and a group of cars drove past, unprovoked, threw a projectile at the officer's vehicle, striking the front windshield, smashing it out. For what reason? For what reason? So with that, we're going to show a video. I have Commander Decker, who leads the homicide, who, if you like, can narrate it. And but as we get ready to show you the video, just want to show you the picture of the weapon involved, a .40 caliber Smith & Wesson. Also, we also know, in addition to the potentially depressive state that the suspect was in, we did smell a very strong scent of alcohol emanating from his car. There was an open alcohol bottle that we recovered as part of this investigation.
Pulled into a parking lot, came to rest for a second. Officers pulled up next to it or just behind it. It then went maybe a couple hundred more yards, came to a final rest. As you can see from that is from basically the passenger or the driver's side of the vehicle. Gentleman exited on the driver's side. As he's running, I can see at least 3 gunshots fired directly at our officers. From there, he continued around the corner, and if we play the next video, look at the action of all our officers. but you can clearly see from the two videos, when he exited the vehicle, he had a gun in hand. He clearly was firing shots at our officers. As he made it around the corner, officers approached a second time, still had the gun in hand, and directed that at our officers on two different occasions. Officers returned fire, and unfortunately, was fatally struck.
Thank you. So as you can see, the officers were faced with an armed suspect who was firing shots. And again, I know that the video is moving pretty quick, but you can see in the final encounter that he was still armed with that Smith & Wesson 40 caliber. So at this point, I will take any questions you might have.
Chief, how many instances this town this year where people either pointed guns at or fired on officers and you've returned fire?
This might, as I can remember, and I don't even want to try to guess, George. I know there have been a couple of incidents. I talked some time ago about I think it was 4 or 5 in 1 week, where there was armed encounters with suspects. In one instance, the suspect was armed with a long rifle. He ran in the direction of the officers, and we did fire shots in that incident as well. So it's happened, and it's happening more frequently. I know if you look across the nation, we have more officers killed by gunfire this year to date, as compared to year to date last year. We're sitting at 17% increase. I think that was my last check. So it's becoming increasingly violent.
At this point, Chief, you have no connection to this individual and the 5 that were injured that was being investigated as part of that scene?
There was no connection to that scene. Again, we believe, and again, we may know as this investigation progresses, that he laid in wait, he waited. Again, he encountered our officers at 2:30 in the morning. We were at the scene doing our investigative work at around 10:30. So we believe he sat there. He may have been nearby, certainly consuming alcohol. His music was loud. It was as if he was preparing himself for battle. I've seen other scenes over my time where suspects will, ingest an intoxicant prior to a shooting, loud music. And so, but again, it's hard for us to determine a motive. We just know that a day prior, it was apparent he's distraught over losing his friend. Is that the sole reason? We don't know.
Chief, those 5 that were shot, the person that died, they ended up getting shot up and died because of the shooting and then the car accident, or were they just driving and then died because of the accident?
I think it has something. It was directly connected. I don't know if anybody has more detail, but it was directly connected to the 5 that were shot.
Our early investigation, there was 5 people shot. We believe that the suspects, as they fled that location, struck a vehicle, and unfortunately, an occupant of the other vehicle that was struck was fatally injured. The suspects fled on foot from there. So we believe those to be the suspects of the shooting themselves, is how we're investigating it at this time. And again, going to the other question, at this time, we don't have any connection to this gentleman involving that original shooting. There is a caliber consistent weapon that we'll certainly check back on, but that's also an early investigation.
And again, I want to note this suspect does not have a substantial criminal history, and so we're really trying to understand the why of this attack on our police officers.
Unrelated question, if you don't mind. We know this past weekend there was an accident that happened where 2 people died driving, unfortunately, straight into the steps of a church. During the video that went out there, one of the people was saying that they tried to call 911, but the calls were straight before this attack.
I would have preferred that, and that's a question we certainly can look into, but when you ask me a question without at least giving me an opportunity to prepare and look into it, we deal with a number of incidents, so I don't have an answer for you, but Nicole from our media relations will get that to you.
Chief, we have a few questions.
Sure.
This is from Jim Kurtzner from Channel 7. He said, are you concerned Detroit could again become a flashpoint with the verdict in the George Floyd trial in Minnesota? And can you describe, in general, your plans?
Well, as I always say, Detroit Police Department remains in a state of readiness. I am not taking the verdict outcome lightly. I do believe, as I said on a national news station this morning, I firmly believe that regardless of whether this officer is acquitted or if he's found guilty, I believe, based on my judgment, that there will be disruptions. I'll take you back to what we saw last year when some of the angry members of the protests out in Portland demanded that federal agents leave. Many in the city probably believe that after the agents were withdrawn, that there will be no further violence. It only escalated. That's one example. We look at the most recent incident out of Buffalo Center, Minneapolis. The police chief resigned, the involved officer resigned, and the city manager. They too believe possibly there will be no further violence. Violence continued and continues to this day. And so I have no reason to believe that whether he's acquitted or found guilty, that there will not be violence. Now, as it relates specific to Detroit, we have no indication. As I've always said, we certainly embrace right to free speech. We embrace those who protest peacefully, but we have a zero tolerance for any violence directed at police officers, any violence directed to members of our community, any damage to property. We will take prompt action. There will be a response to that. But as I also indicated, Detroit last year, unlike some other cities, there was no looting, burning of buildings. And so I thank not only the phenomenal work of the men and women who served 100-plus days, I also thank many in our community who stood with us, many who are activists in our community who stood with us. And so we have a strong community support.
One more question from Simon Chiquette, Channel 7. He wants to know, what are you telling the community about the need to take a stand against gun violence?
Well, I think it's simple to say, Simon. That's an interesting question, but I'll do my best. We talk about gun violence all the time. It's not by accident that the men and women go out each and every day and they focus on individuals who are illegally carrying guns. We focus. So, by example, this weekend, members of this department, not this weekend, but this past week, we made 103 concealed carry weapons arrests. 103. As you've heard me say, we focus on the illegal carrying of guns. We're averaging anywhere between 60 to 100 carrying concealed weapons arrests per week. So we are serious. So if that's not a message, Simon, I don't know what message it is. We're out there doing the work, and the officers also know as they're going out, making gun arrests that are being illegally carried, also seizing guns, they're focusing on what we're trying to stop. Most of the violence comes at the hands of someone illegally carrying a gun. They're using guns. And when you look at this past weekend, most of our incidents involve multiple shooting scenes where multiple people were shot, and all of them came about as a dispute. So we have people that are not processing disputes. We can blame part of it, certainly, on the pandemic and the mental health of so many and the impact that's having. We can also blame it in part for those who are getting arrested carrying weapons illegally, and they're getting these low bonds, no bonds, and tethers, especially if the individual has a substantial criminal history. Might I remind you that one of our fallen, Sergeant Elaine Williams, was murdered. She was murdered by her estranged child's father, and as we speak, he is out on a tether, charged with murder. I always like it when you all have many questions. Obviously, I'll give you a lot of information. We will make the video available to you and the photographs if you desire. Any other questions before
I have a follow-up question from Simon.
Yes.
He just wants to know, do more community leaders need to step up
Well, Simon,
regarding the question?
you know, I think I'm a budding journalist, because sometimes when I get questions, I want to ask the journalist a question. I've said it, I will continue to say it, that we wish more would have stood up and denounced the reckless comments by both U.S. Congresspersons. Now, I know that the president stepped right up and certainly denounced the reckless comments. Those do nothing. That's not leadership. That's not leadership. You sit in a seat of influence, and so I can't say you sit in a seat of leadership. Because you sit in a seat of influence, you carry a great deal of responsibility. So that's what we should be addressing, Simon. That's exactly what we should be addressing. Reckless comments that fuel violence, particularly violence against police officers. The same people, and I know I speak for so many Detroiters, the vast number of Detroiters, the majority, they want effective and constitutional policing. They respect this police department, they embrace this police department, and they don't take kindly to individuals who try to stoke the flames of violence toward their police officers. Any other questions from social media? All right. Thank you very much. Okay.